What I love about tonight, my favorite thing about tonight, is that when you walked in the door, I was like, "Did you bring beer?"
And as I hold it up to the window, and I'm like, "What do you think, Mitch?"
That was my favorite. It's my favorite part of the day because I like disasters and beer. That's the best combination.
Maybe we can get a beer sponsorship with this lead-in.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Is there a disaster-themed beer?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of it.
There's got to be one out there. I'm
Surely
sure Sam Adams, Brewer Patriot, will make us a disaster-themed beer. FEMA beer.
Just what a public health / emergency management podcast needs. Beer sponsors.
Speaking of, we have a great show. We're going to be talking about Fukushima in depth.
Yep.
3 years later.
We'll talk about the Washington mudslide. We'll talk about some funding issues in emergency management.
And we're going to do an OMG IAP. We have a great question this week, which I'm excited about. And your new jam.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about a great new TV show called Broad City, which is like the funniest. In fact, I saw a tweet today that someone called it the funniest show on TV right now.
Oh, damn. That means we're not the funniest show on TV.
It's shocking.
Oh, we're not actually on.
We're not on TV. This doesn't go on TV.
It's Dukes of Hazzards.
Sorry. We have a mascot. I'm so sorry.
My dog's really well behaved.
Mitch's dog Tonks is kind of going crazy, I think, at our Dukes of Hazzard music. But it's fine. So ignore any barking you hear in the background. Yeah. So, all right. You want to just jump into it?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to it. So first up, let's do the news rundown. So, tough story coming out of Oso, Washington. I'm sure everybody has heard about it, but a massive mudslide hit at about 10:45 a.m. last Saturday. It's a 40-foot deep mudslide that covers a square mile of area, and it's just a really devastating thing to happen to a small community. This area has had a history of slides, including a real powerful one in 2006, but there was no advance warning for this disaster, and people are saying it came out of nowhere. A geologist from NPR said it was caused by a few things: heavy rains in March, a hill that's fairly weak glacial material, and that it was basically a wall of sand and silt that's hundreds of feet tall. To make it worse, a river at the bottom of the valley has been cutting into the edge of the slope, so it sounds like it was only just a matter of time before this landslide occurred. But 26 people have died and an additional 90 are missing, so they're still doing search and recovery work.
And I think they've done, just to dig into this a little bit, a really good job with what is maybe the hardest task here, which is the casualty counts, right? I mean, I think they've been very specific about what they know and what they don't know throughout this, because it's fluctuating on both sides. They're finding people that people thought were missing who are in fact safe, and they're also, locating and identifying the bodies through the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. So I mean,
right.
I think that's a really hard job, and they're doing really really good work there.
Yeah, and I think just today, I think they downgraded the number of missing from in the hundreds to 90. So they're just still trying to get a grasp on who was there, who was in the area. It's a pretty rural community, so it's tough. And the emergency manager of this county said that it's also a preparedness operation, that they're worried about the flooding from the blocked river, and so they're actually still evacuating towns as of a few days ago because they're worried about additional flooding from the towns downriver.
So there are a couple things to highlight. Reading the coverage, they set up a command post that's about 20 miles away from the site, right? Because you're dealing with like a square mile of mud. It's 40 feet deep, and so they needed to set up logistic staging area. They did a really good job doing that. The emergency management practice lesson, I think, here is that right off the bat, when the professional search and rescue teams came in, they followed their protocol, which is that they didn't allow volunteer searchers there. They were worried that volunteers would come in and they would get themselves injured, not having the right materials and not having the right equipment. So Sunday, so this happened Saturday. So Sunday, that was a firm line. Sunday night, there was, reading some Wall Street Journal, Seattle Times coverage, there was kind of a confrontation in the fire district between volunteer searchers that wanted to participate And the professionals said, no, you can't. The next night on Monday, the deputy incident commander for the scene said, you know what? If you're volunteers, you have the right equipment, then we'll let you in, but only locals, not people from outside the area. And Tuesday, they actually relaxed that. They said, listen, this is a major disaster. People can come in, they'll register, and we'll take folks in. And I think now they're taking something like 50 people at a time in to do the search and rescue, but there's still hundreds more that are sort of waiting and who are checking in and who are trying to do it. So watching the evolution of that has been fascinating.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. On one hand, it's good that the government is adapting and changing to the changing situation. I kind of applaud them for, opening up and making use of these volunteers that are coming in. On the other hand, it seems risky, right, to use volunteers that have come. You don't necessarily know their qualifications or credentials. It looked, at least, it's a little dangerous looking at on the media and taking that as gospel, but at least on the media, it didn't look like some of the volunteers were trained volunteers with equipment. As part of an organized search and rescue group, it kind of looked like, relatives of loved ones that were missing were coming in and really wanting to help.
Yeah, Sunday it seemed like they were arresting people, or they were threatening people with arrest.
Wow.
As they came in. It points to another unique thing about this incident, which is that, search and rescue teams, the emergency management theory on that says that if you're on a search and rescue team, usually most of the actual search and rescue is going to be done by residents of the area in the first hours after disaster. So search and rescue teams often recover more bodies than living victims, than survivors. In this case, the destruction was so total of the entire area that there wasn't a big cadre of survivors who were looking for folks. Mm-hmm. And so the search and rescue teams really were first on the ground and owned the scene in a way that I don't think you see usually in mass events like this.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's a really tough situation, and I also wonder if this is the new reality we're living in. Our emergency management agencies from now on going to have to deal with spontaneous volunteers coming up. I know it's been a part of the last few major responses, but I even think, now, so even more people want to help out when a tragedy like this happens, and I don't know if the emergency management community has really come up to speed with volunteer management as much as it should.
Absolutely. My favorite statistic for this, Joplin, Missouri, where the tornado hit a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Population of Joplin, 50,000. Mm-hmm. Number of registered volunteers who came to help after Joplin. Do you know this?
No.
You want to guess? What if I hum the Jeopardy music? Will you guess if I hum the Jeopardy music?
No, it's okay. 20,000.
175,000.
What?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
I know. That's what, I think you have to think when you're planning for volunteer management exponentially. It's just the crowds are that huge of people that are going to want to come help that you have to funnel somewhere productive.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Incredible. All right, so the next story comes out of New Jersey. A community group called U.S. Strong, is a Jersey Shore-based group, is advocating for a tax on carbon emission that can be used to fund a independent disaster funding source. Some of the reason they give is that our current costs are in the neighborhood of $8 billion to $13 billion in New Jersey just since Sandy's landfall on October 29th, 2012, and that it's just logical to have a funding source. He says this is the head of U.S. Strong, says it would be good for American taxpayers because post-disaster studies in recent years have shown that $1 in pre-storm planning and preparations can save $9 in post-storm disaster relief and recovery costs. So it's interesting. A couple questions I have, would the funds be used for disaster preparedness, mitigation, planning, training, exercising, or would it be for response gear and first responders, or would it be for both? And the second thing I have is, this $1, $9 quote, I see that thrown around so much. And I know, and I'm pretty sure I've actually used that to justify, for grant, asking for grants and stuff.
Yeah,
but
it's totally worth $9.
right, $1 in planning saves $9 later. What do we think about that? Is that true? Do we have the article that?
Yeah, there's a paper, right? There's actually a study that was done that did sort of a prospective review going back, looking at this stuff. And here's the thing: the sad part about this is that I want this number. Like, this is like the magic number that you need for disaster funding. I want 1 to 9 to be so true.
Right.
To me, this is a sketchy paper. Like, when you read the paper, like, it's not a really good methodology. It equates things that maybe you can't really equate in this. I would love if the authors want to come on and like tell us why it's totally right. I really want to hear that.
Yeah.
But I'm worried about it. On the other hand, I love the idea of this dedicated funding source. I think that it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of graduate programs in emergency management. There's even a few doctor programs. I'm wondering why this study hasn't been replicated, because it would be such a powerful stat that every government across the world would use to justify why we should spend money on preparedness. It's to go along with it, and I absolutely agree with this group too. I think the U.S. needs disaster funding source. Just something other in the news. The U.S. government is citing an urgent need to call on hospitals to improve disaster plans. So the New York Times is reporting that federal officials want sweeping new requirements for healthcare industry, including nursing homes and hospitals, to basically do more emergency preparedness, emergency management work. And the healthcare industry, naturally is pushing back, saying, we don't have the money for this. You've got to give us more money. So this brings up some other questions too. Like, one of the things I think about is, should emergency management agencies get into the business of regulating? Dun, dun, dun. I mean, you think about other industries that are regulated. The financial industry is heavily, heavily regulated. Public health agencies, they have regulatory authority.
What do you do? You go into every business and you say, well, your disaster plan sucks. Like, you have to close. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you follow the lead of public health agencies. You say, these are the requirements. You're a hospital, you're a school, you're a daycare.
You give a letter grade. You're like, you guys get an A in preparedness.
Right. You come in once a year, you inspect them, you look at their after action reports, you look at their plans, and, if they don't meet the criteria, you fine them. And, they have to pass the emergency management laws to be accredited, and that, that provides some tax money there.
So I think what you need, I guess it's like a circular thing, right? To me, if you're going to do that, you've got to have a metric first. Like restaurant regulations are there because we know foodborne illness happens in restaurants.
Right.
So we need this chain of causality, right?
Yes.
We need to know if you don't have a disaster plan, you're going to cause morbidity and mortality. People are going to get hurt because of it.
Right. And it comes back to that paper, right?
Right.
Like, if we could have hard stats that say, it's going to cost the city $9 billion in recovery or $1 billion in planning.
And here's the thing about those papers. One of the things about that paper is that because there have been a couple of other papers like this, and Housing and Urban Development did one. We had a study that came out of Missouri that came, and James Lee Witt looked at some of the cost-benefit analysis after it that showed that, so there was a community, there were a number of floods there, they had a lot of recovery funds that FEMA came in and spent all this money for, and then those communities invested money, but it was mostly in mitigation, right? They bought green spaces back, they put in flood improvement walls, they did kind of hard construction, and that decreased recovery costs considerably.
Wow.
So I think we have that proof. The proof that we need is the proof in the soft preparedness stuff, the relationship building and the planning and the training
and
all that
right.
stuff.
Yeah.
But the reason, one reason that I think the Sandy recovery in the States has been so slow is because the way that funding was allocated was through steady state federal programs. It was all put into existing federal programs. But if there's a pot of money like what you're talking about, I think that lets us be much more flexible in how that stuff gets allocated, and it can be much faster.
Yeah, which is definitely needed. I hope there's some higher education organizations doing some long-term studies on the Sandy money. Like, I hope we can prove that the billions of dollars going into recovery from Sandy is actually going to bring down future response costs.
Absolutely. Any grad students out there? No, I get to.
That kind of sounds like a pickup line. Any grad students out there?
Well,
tweet me at Hazards Podcast.
It was a pickup line, Andrew. Don't tell Jordan.
I'm telling your wife.
Oh my gosh. Now I get to talk about something that I love to talk about, which I didn't even tease at the beginning of this thing, which is the Waffle House Index.
Oh man, I do love waffles.
I really?
Yeah.
You know what?
I do love Waffle House.
I've never had a waffle at Waffle House.
Oh my gosh.
I've had scattered, smothered, and covered hash browns. Yep. I've had sausage. I've had the chili. I love the chili.
Oh, yeah. I have not had the chili.
You've never had the chili at Waffle House. You've had it at 4 a.m. after a natural disaster.
Oh.
Which is where. So I actually got this because I was reading a report in the I think it was the Atlanta Journal. No, I'm sorry. I don't want to insult the Atlanta Journal. It was in the New York Times. I'm going to call the Times out for this.
The old gray lady.
That was talking about the Atlanta snowstorm, and it said that FEMA had just come up with this new Waffle House index that it was using. And I remember back in 2004 that Florida used the Waffle House index for storms back then.
Yeah, it's not new. It's been around. Like, I feel like if you're in emergency management, you've known about this for a while,
Absolutely.
Right?
And the index is simple. It's like the Waffle House is green, meaning it's up and running. It's yellow, meaning that it's running off a generator and it has a limited menu. Or it's red, meaning that it's closed. And the reason it's there, Craig Fugate, the current genius that's running FEMA, and I mean that literally.
We love you, Craig.
I really do.
I do too.
I'm
serious. I love him. I will make out with him right now.
Really? Would you?
Yes.
Craig, if you come on the show, Andrew will make out with you. He did it because it's so rare for Waffle Houses to close, right? And I remember we used it in 2004. It got coverage in 2004. And in 2005, Waffle House started a program to make themselves better prepared. And this is actually why I love Waffle House. Wall Street Journal named Waffle House one of the top 4 prepared companies in the country after, I think, Home Depot, Walmart, or a couple of the others.
Wow.
And what they did was they designed this menu. They said, look, if you only have a generator, here's a limited menu you can serve. You know, you can still serve hash browns. You can serve things that we can grill on that's the important part, right?
First off, hash browns. You
can
always have to serve them.
Bacon, right? And we prefer that you serve sausage instead of bacon because you can cook more sausage in limited grill space than bacon. And they actually set them up for it. And I love this because it means that Waffle House has like a scalable response.
Right.
And they can keep going, right? If they just have potable water and some kind of like propane source and a generator, they can like keep moving.
Right. And they also went through and prioritized what foods we should serve first.
Yes.
Based on how long they will last too. So, I mean, they really went in depth on figuring out, how long can we last without power, without, gas.
I love that. This makes me so impressed with Waffle House, and also I'm getting so hungry right now.
Seriously, I need some waffles.
Talking about Waffle House.
I wonder. So we're recording this in Brooklyn, New York, and we don't have any Waffle Houses here. It's sad thing.
There are 1,600 of them. I just want to point out throughout the Gulf Coast, from Florida all the way around to Texas. There are 1,600 Waffle Houses.
And even up the East Coast. I feel like they're in Virginia too. Mm-hmm. They go up pretty hard, but they haven't made it up to New York. So maybe we should quit our jobs and franchise a Waffle House. In Brooklyn. Let's just keep that on the back burner.
You finally found a plan for our lives.
But now what's the equivalent for Brooklyn, for New York City? I'm wondering if it's bodegas. If you don't live in New York, bodegas are what we call the little corner delis. They're often 24/7. I think maybe the bodegas, like if those go down and aren't open, it's really, really bad.
Oh, great idea for New York City OEM, a bodega index.
They should.
But you'd have to work with every bodega owner, right? To make this scalable red, yellow, green, give them guidance on what they can cook and what they can't cook for the little grills.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would work. I mean, I told, like during Sandy, I was working, but my wife needed to get supplies, and I told her, avoid the big supermarkets and the Costco, go to your bodega because they're going to have all the supplies, and people don't think to go there first, so
I think that works for the city. I think for Brooklyn though, we might need like a pickle index or like a sweater yarn index.
That's true. An artisanal cheese index. Cheese store
microbrewer index.
Microbrewer, yeah.
All right, so we're going to dig into our first kind of in-depth topic here. So we're going to talk about Fukushima. So Fukushima, it's been 3 years, if you guys remember this. It was March of 2011. And it happened after the tsunami, the earthquake followed by the tsunami in Japan. And before we even get into this, okay, I want to note that the real disaster that happened in Japan at that time was the tsunami and the earthquake. The death toll was much higher. The damage was much higher. But one of the things about radiation is it captures the imagination in this weird way. And so we want to sort of talk through about that and talk through in particular what's happened at Fukushima since that time. So March 11th, 2011, we had 3 of 6 nuclear reactors at the plant there near Fukushima, which is about 130 miles out of Tokyo, which was the worst radiation accident since Chernobyl in 1986, where apparently, just as a side note, the trees that would normally be devoured by beetles are still like there. There are no eating beetles in Chernobyl.
That's amazing.
And so we had tsunami waves that were over 100 feet. It broke the containment system for the nuclear power plant, and it led to this kind of cascading series of failures, which elevated the radiation levels there. Some reports say that the level of fallout from Fukushima was actually higher than the level of fallout from the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Again, as soon as you talk about this, it's misleading, right? Because then you think, well, it's causing all of these tens of thousands of deaths, but the explosive force at Hiroshima was what caused all the deaths, not necessarily the fallout, right?
Right.
But in this case, the fallout has been large and consistent. So it's been 3 years, right? And there are a couple of things that I want to highlight about this. So here's what Japan did. Couple things, and I think it comes down to data and it comes down to information sharing. So first, Japan didn't have good relationships with TEPCO, right? Everybody, I think I spent like a year making fun of TEPCO because they seem to make all of these sort of stumble mistakes after Fukushima. And to me, the biggest one they did was that they drew this 20-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant. And you think, okay, well, that makes sense. We have an exclusion zone, and that's where all the radiation is, right? That's what you think. But it turns out that they drew this exclusion zone around the power plant because they were worried about another explosion. And they told people to evacuate from that exclusion zone because of that fear of another explosion. Mm-hmm. But the secret is that's not actually where the radiation was. The radiation went northwest in a plume, and so it went to the 2 nearby cities, Fukushima being one of those actual nearby cities. But nobody there knew that because the Japanese government didn't give out that data for something like 8 days. I mean, and the really sort of bad part of that, listening to some BBC coverage, because if you want to dig into depth to something, you always go for the BBC.
Go to BBC.
They gave it to the U.S. government 2 days after the event. So for some reason, the U.S. military knew where the plume of radiation was, but not the Japanese people.
Oh, my gosh.
So just first rule of post-disaster communications, don't give your data to the military first.
Right.
You want to tell the public about it.
Tell the public. Yeah. I mean, I just, so I'm helping design a I&D exercise right now. And I just feel like this sort of thing is on my mind. I just feel like there's so many misconceptions about radiation and the need for public information before and during a disaster like this it can literally save lives. Some things we do in emergency management doesn't really save lives, but this is one thing. If you can tell people about radiation, how to shelter in place, those really can have an impact. And I'm agreeing with you. I think the public information mistakes that were made during this are pretty astounding.
So the problem, because I've been thinking a lot about radiological stuff too, one of the emergency managers was talking, and I think this was, I was trying to look at both this BBC stuff and also an article that was in an emergency management magazine about this recovery. The thing about it is, radiation is something we can measure really well,
right?
It's good, but it means that we know very clearly what background radiation is. And Fukushima now is just a little above background, right? It really, from a health perspective, this is very controversial, I guess, but it's only a few ticks above background, but it's not background. And so you can't say to people, it's safe or it's gone back to normal, right? There's no idea of like what normal is. And so these Japanese scientists have spent years trying to convince the public using data and explanations why it's okay that it isn't normal.
Right.
And people are not just not buying that.
Well, sure. And especially after the government, kind of gave information to other governments before telling them first, you can kind of see why they'd be distrustful. I also think it's interesting how this disaster had worldwide ramifications. I mean, I remember people in the United States were buying like Prussian blue, trying to get their hands on anti-radiation medicine. Germany decided to close a bunch of nuclear power plants, even in the U.S. I mean, before this still, but we haven't built any new nuclear power plants. I think it would be a hard sell to put one in somebody's backyard. But, and again, this goes to those misconceptions about radiation.
I think, one of the problems is that it's so hard to get rid of radiation.
Right.
So there have been a lot of things in the news about Fukushima and the contractors. So they're employing a lot of contractors. In some cases, these are homeless folks. These are folks who are just being pulled off the street, put in sort of uniforms and cleaned it up. And the thing about it is, if you're cleaning up dirt that's been contaminated with radiation, you need to take about 5 centimeters off the top of dirt to get to non-contaminated dirt underneath. Then what you've got is like tons and tons of contaminated dirt.
Right.
What do you do with it? It's not like anybody's going to here, you want my contaminated dirt?
Right. Exactly.
You're stuck with it. The other thing, concrete is porous. We think of concrete as a hard substance, but it has these little holes in it, and radiation gets down in there. So to clean it, you've got to scrape off a level of concrete off the top of it. So, recovery to that just is billions and billions of this repetitive, destructive work.
Right.
That you wind up with all of this debris, and what do you do with it?
And that's, but that's, it's a risk reward calculation, right? I mean, that's if something horrible like this happens. If nothing like this happens, you have years and years and years of affordable electricity, with relatively low pollution, low waste product.
And I think that, yeah, that's right. And one of the main nuclear providers here in the States is spending like $500 million to upgrade their facilities based on the lessons from Fukushima. So I think it is leading to a lot of positive changes in the industry. And I'm not going to, sit here and sort of call yes or no on nuclear power. But I do think that nuclear power plants have done internal drills a lot, and drills in the directly surrounding community.
Right.
And one thing Fukushima showed is that, we're talking that these radioactive plumes can travel just dozens and dozens of miles depending on weather conditions. So it's not enough to plan for a 10-kilometer, 20-kilometer exclusion zone. You've really got to make this a regional effort so that everybody sort of knows the same rules for cleaning this stuff up.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess more to come on Fukushima, but I hope it will, lead to a more safe nuclear industry for all of us.
All right, up next we have a listener question. Yeah. It's been a while since we've done one of these. This is a good one though. So if you don't know, you write us in, email us, you can tweet us, hazardspodcast@gmail.com. We will not use your real name. So here's the question this week.
OMGIP.
OMGIP.
That's the name of the segment.
Oh, that's what we're calling
the
segment. Sorry, yes. OMGIP. We need a name. Let's just call this person Gandalf.
Oh, yeah, no, that's good.
Wait, have we already used Lord of the Rings?
We haven't, no, because we were only using we were using famous disaster managers.
Oh, disaster
managers. But I think Gandalf a famous disaster manager.
He definitely managed some big disasters.
Dragons,
into the world.
Balrogs. He was there.
Okay, so this is from Gandalf, and he says, love the podcast.
Always a good opening. You should always start off with us loving the podcast.
Love the podcast.
Hint for listeners.
I don't have to include this part of the question, but I'm going to anyway. Love the podcast. As someone looking to change careers in emergency management, I literally can't get my hands on enough stuff about the field. I have my degree in another field, communications, but have been working to re-educate myself about some of the emergency management topics I studied in college. Thus, my question.
Here we go.
What is the single most important thing an applicant without emergency management experience can do to make themselves attractive as a candidate for an emergency management position? Specifically, and I guess this would make it a two-part question, does translating my previous job experience into emergency management vocabulary make myself appear more relevant, or is it just grasping at straws?
Oh, yeah, there's like a wide range of stuff. So does that mean like instead of saying like writing a press release, you're like composed to sit rep, use, I guess there's a level there is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So what do I think about that? It's funny, just to note, emergency management was named in 2011 one of the best jobs by U.S. News.
That's amazing.
Really?
I did not know that until I saw that I'm kind of surprised because this field does not pay a lot of money. Like, you're not going to get rich in this field, right?
It pays in satisfaction.
It absolutely does. And it pays in, job satisfaction.
Yeah, but not in actual money.
But but you can't live on it, is what I'm trying to say.
I guess, but here was the funny thing about that. Both it appeared in 2011.
Yeah, 2011.
And then, I don't know why. And then it disappeared again. In 2012, it was gone.
Wow.
So it was like a little blip on the U.S. News radar. So, Gandalf, maybe you should just rethink your career choice, first of all.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So he's got experience in other fields, and does that translate to emergency management? I think it does. I think if I'm looking to hire someone, I don't automatically look for the CEM certification or the sorry, we have a squeaky toy with our mascot dog making noise. Sorry, I don't automatically look at the emergency management experience. I look for significant job experience. I look for can they project manage? Can they hold to a timeline? Have they experience following budget and public speaking? I'm so sorry.
We're trying so hard to keep it together while my dog is spazzing out.
I don't look just for that technical emergency management experience is what I'm trying to say. So I don't think that's an automatic knock against your resume.
No, I think that's right too. I guess I would break it into two categories. Okay, I think that it is good to have field experience, especially from emergency management.
What do you mean by field experience?
I mean experience during an emergency response.
Okay.
I think that is sort of a grounding experience that it helps to sift out people who really can work in emergency management and who can. On the other hand, to me, okay, this is a personal statement I'm making. A lot of emergency management training, like master's degrees in emergency management, it's a new field, right? And that training is just not where it needs to be.
Absolutely.
I don't think I would much rather have somebody with a degree in communications and then a couple of years experience than I would somebody fresh out of like emergency management school.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Even with a CEM certification, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Totally. I really love, so the University of Washington gave some good tips for people who wanted a career in emergency management. So it's a good thing to do. They're a little basic. The first one is don't be a criminal. So it's really good for any career, not just emergency management. You don't want a criminal record. And I will also say that one of the best training tools I've found, Gandalf, is that FEMA has this set of professional online trainings, not like the IS 100, 200, 300, 400 that everybody does for ICS, but they have a set of professional development courses that include things like how you do emergency planning, how you build exercises, leadership and decision making in emergency. I think that those are really, really important things for dealing with wicked problems.
Yeah, wicked problems. I do want to say the University of Washington article was written by my friend Scott Preston, who's a great emergency manager, a lot of experience, great to work with. Hey Scott, so I just want to give him a shout out.
He's totally right. You shouldn't be a criminal. That's important.
And then also the other point I was going to make, and I just forgot it. Rats.
Oh man,
those are really good.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember it now. Volunteering at emergency management agencies. I feel like that.
Yes.
If you have the time and financially, if you can swing it, that just, get a volunteer, go to someone, say, I will write a plan, I will update a plan for you, I will design an exercise. That will lead to a job. I almost guarantee it.
So a couple of things about that. Number one, international experience, like Alex Theron, who we interviewed last time, going out of the country, is incredibly useful for your resume, or even your local Red Cross chapter. The Red Cross has significant and managerial opportunities for volunteers sometimes. If you can put enough effort into it, something like that really builds your resume and is, I think, much more useful than any kind of formal study in emergency management.
Yeah, and I would also say just like use your interest and degree, whatever, if it's not in emergency management, and come to an emergency management agency and say, say you're in communication, say, I'll do a review of all your press releases, or I will write write you pre-scripted press releases, for free for 3 months. We'll jump at that.
Yeah, because we like the free work, first of all. Exactly. Anybody that's going to work for free, we're like all over that. But I would say, when you write your resume, like the person reading it, they're a smart, man or woman. You don't want to sort of pretend to be something you're not. Like if you're a communications person, just lay yourself out as the best communications person you can be. Use that language. Don't try and like sugarcoat it with all ICS kind of stuff, because I think that will get you into more trouble than it's worth.
Absolutely. Yeah. Be yourself, Gandalf. Be yourself.
Right.
And if you have, once you get a job, email us back. Let us know how it turned out.
And anybody else out there, if you want advice, hazardspodcast@gmail.com. We are literally always listening.
These are great new songs. Are these new GarageBand jingles you put together?
That's right. Yeah, one night I got drunk and I just made a lot of stuff on GarageBand.
These are really good.
That's the soundtrack for Dukes of Hazzard.
You should go into music. So next we got a short review of a great new TV show. It's in its first city called Broad City. It's on Comedy Central. It stars and is written by Alana Glazer and Abby Jacobson. It started out as a web series called Broad City that went for a few seasons, and it was hilarious, and then it got picked up by Comedy Central. So a couple weeks ago, their actually season finale was last night, but a couple weeks ago they had an episode called Hurricane Wanda, and it's these two girls, single, living in New York City, and they're going through a Hurricane Sandy type situation. And I think this is just another great realistic look at kind of what goes down in an emergency management. It's funny that the most realistic emergency management or disaster movies seem to be comedies, like the other one we reviewed, This Is the End.
Yeah, I think that's right, actually. And it's because there's this weird, I think, sense of like disassociation during a disaster, where movies that are tragedies or whatever tend to be overly sentimental, whereas comedies kind of catch this weird sort of angsty normalcy that there is in a disaster.
Right.
Because there aren't like the swelling strings that you get in like a Russell Crowe movie.
Right. It kind of plays on the anxiety, but also the kind of indifference of what's happening.
So here's our first clip.
In case we all die, there is something that I must confess to you, Ilana. Last summer, I switched our laptop chargers during the night, like a sneaky thief. And that's why yours never works. And I see you try, and you try, and you try, and it's because it's mine. It's never gonna work, Ilana. I'm so sorry.
It's not a big deal at all.
Really? My God. You are forgiveness. You are. Wow. Thank you, everybody. Namaste. Gracias.
Okay, I'll continue the game.
Namaste.
Namaste, Andrew.
So this is great. So I think this harps on like something that happens in emergencies where you suddenly, the rain's coming down, the electricity has gone off, and it causes this cleansing of like, oh my God, forgiveness and confession to each other, which I think sometimes happens.
Yeah, Rebecca Solnit wrote a great book that's called A Paradise Built in Hell, which is also a great title, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. And it talks about this thing that sort of happens in Hurricane Wanda, which is that a number of people from different backgrounds all come together to find like this harmony. They don't actually maybe find harmony in Broad City in the same way.
But they do come together. So these two girls, Alana and Abby, they start stockpiling beer and candles and games. They invite their neighbors over, and so they kind of have adventures in the apartment while this storm is going, which I think is realistic. I think disasters to a degree bring communities together before, during, and after the disaster.
Which as emergency managers, we never get to experience, right? The running joke in my house is that if the world's ending, I'm not going to be home.
Right, exactly.
So so what do you do? So it's sort of sad for us that we don't get to partake in this kind of extraordinary community in the same way.
Yeah, and the kind of fun times that, if you're not directly impacted by this disaster, kind of they get to have. So I think we have another clip too, right?
Yeah, we absolutely do have another clip. Here we go.
What are you doing? You are wasting edge of death time. Make a move. What do you want me to do? My talent can't be to, wash his body.
You mean, wash his body after sex, right? I want to, make sure you're optimizing your fantasy.
I thought of?
All right, so it's getting a little crazy.
It's a little
in the
awkward for
apartment.
us, Andrew. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah, sorry, they said the S word.
Mm-hmm.
They but Alana and Abby are having roommates over. They're having friends over, and things are getting a little kinky, which I think is realistic too, because Sandy, IB Times will post the link on the website. Actually, there was a baby boom 9 months after Sandy, so I think they can trace these birth rates back to these disasters. Everybody's held up in their apartments, and babies get made.
It's funny. I was did you tell him I went running
No,
after
I did
the dog?
not. I
You
tried to
covered
talk
that whole
through
thing
it.
really well.
Yeah.
That was really good.
But now we have to tell him.
During
because
Andrew's little speech there, I was like running the dog outside because she was going crazy. But I didn't even have to bring that up because you covered it so well.
Yeah,
But now I believe
now
that
we
whole
do.
thing. So the research about babies after disaster is really fascinating, actually. So it does turn out that there are these baby bumps that are 9 months after disasters and terrorist events. So
Really?
even after Sandy in Jersey, births went up like 20%. The 9 months later. But it's funny because after terrorist incidents, and I got this from research that came off a Slate article that was by a woman called Carla Starr. So Carla Starr's piece on Slate says that after terrorist incidents, more marriages happen. There's actually a marriage bump. But after natural disasters, there's like a divorce bump. And the reason is that terrorist incidents are high fatality but low ongoing stress. And so you sort of reach out to people and try and draw them closer. And natural disasters have ongoing stress that usually exacerbates problems that are already there.
Interesting.
So people dealing with that tend to sort of get divorced. But both of them create more babies afterwards. So,
Hey.
I guess you could debate about which one's sort of better for the family.
Everybody loves babies. But check it out. Broad City on Comedy Central. The season finale was yesterday, but it's already been picked up by season 2. So,
Oh, has it?
yep,
All right. Go Broad City.
it's great.
I hope they do more disasters. And, Hurricane Wanda, it's funny because when you're talking to people about the names of hurricanes, they alternate, right? They alternate genders. So Hurricane Sandy was funny because although I knew the gender, Sandy was female. But a lot of us couldn't figure out if it was female or male because it's a little
It's
bit
a little
of,
gender
on the edge
neutral,
there.
right, yeah.
But Hurricane Wanda is also similar to Sandy in that they're both near the end of the alphabet. And so obviously as you go later in the season, you get storms that are named higher and higher in the alphabet.
Right.
So I think if there was Hurricane Zelda, we would really
Oh,
be in
Hurricane
trouble.
Zelda.
Oh, that would be bad. And we would
crazy.
need this guy named Link to like go deep into the
Save
middle
us all.
to save us from Zelda.
All right, so that's a wrap. Episode 4. Good job, Mitch.
Yeah, no, good job, Andrew. We both did really well there.
Couple things to mention here at the end. For one, we were highlighted on emergencymanagement.com, which is kind of cool. It's like the emergency management. I wonder what year he bought that domain name.
I don't know. Eric Holderman. So
Yeah.
we love Eric Holderman. Thanks for the shout out.
Speaking of Gandalf, he's like the Gandalf of emergency management,
He is
right?
the Gandalf of emergent, which means we're little hobbits on our
Yes.
quest for the One Ring to. How far can we take this analogy?
to rule, yeah, I don't know.
Not that far, I guess.
But he is great. He mentioned us, and what I thought was so funny about his blog post was that he was like, "There's a real funny podcast out there, Dukes of Hazzards," and he's like, "If you think that's funny, here's a list of puns," and he proceeded to give 3 pages of puns.
Yeah.
Not necessarily emergency management related, but just general puns.
Well, it's good to get more puns out there. We
Yeah,
don't have enough puns
the
in the
world
world.
needs more
Yeah,
puns.
absolutely true.
I also want to mention that the International Association of Emergency Management has a Refer a Friend program going on right now. So if you know someone who's a member of IAEM, they can recommend you, and you can get a year free membership just by using their name when you sign up. So
Are you a member of IE?
I am now. I had let my membership expire,
Yeah.
and but just recently signed back up through the Refer a Friend program.
Oh, so I'm not a member.
Oh yeah,
Can you refer me?
I
now?
wonder if I can now
you?
refer you since I'm a member.
Let's ask IE. You guys, you should let Andrew refer me. Come
Yeah,
on,
if
like
you work
it's-
for IAM or
yeah.
a member,
give
let us
him a
know.
pass. Yeah.
All right, we'll update the blog with links to all the articles we mentioned. Please email us with emergency management questions or suggestions for the show, or suggestions to how to keep Mitch's dogs quiet. Let's see what else. Our email is hazardspodcast@gmail.com, and our Twitter is hazardspodcast. So follow us.
And our website is hazardspodcast.com. We actually have a domain name now.
That's
so
right.
that's really, we're like all high class. So hazardspodcast.com.
And we'll post some more links, including Deadspin had an interesting link of how Hollywood has destroyed America. And it had all the disaster films. And you can click on the city to see how that city was destroyed.
Oh, that's awesome.
By Hollywood,
so
yeah.
next
it's really
episode,
cool.
we've got to break that down. And we're also going to talk about the West Virginia chemical spill.
Yeah.
And Freedom Industries and all the response that came out of that.
And maybe we'll have a few more drone articles. I don't know. We didn't mention drones this
Oh
week.
my God, we've got to mention drones every week. I do want to mention no dogs were harmed in the making of this podcast.